I recently watched a supposed debate on the wildly popular Whatever podcast. You know, that absolute paragon of virtue and chastity that you're likely to have been exposed to if you ever went down the rabbit hole on modern relationship dynamics. An overindulgence of infotainment. Really highbrow stuff. So imagine my shock when the modern day philosopher king, Hollywood cult decoding, cringe humor edgelord, and based online ortho bro Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis pops up on my feed. I'm a long-term follower of his work, so I felt spiritually compelled to watch him in all his Miami Vice aesthetic glory. Naturally, he didn't disappoint with a Hawaiian shirt and aviator combo that just oozed divine providence. The topic of the debate centered around feminism and whether it is a good or destructive thing for community, society, and civilization at large. As an Orthodox Christian, Jay strongly defended the centuries-old tradition of patriarchal structure and cited the remarkable longevity of the Byzantine Empire, which lasted for over 1,000 years, to support his claim. He also correctly referred to feminism as a modern political movement with multiple waves, each seen as revolutionary in nature relative to the time frame they emerge within. An important distinction must be made between the words feminine, femininity, and the feminism revolutionary movements. At no point does Jay seriously or deliberately degrade women, or the value of the feminine, or natural femininity. He only finds significant issue with modern neoliberalism and the political revolutionary movement of feminism, claiming it has roots in the destructive French Revolution and citing numerous examples of both founders and prominent figures within the movement, explicitly asserting a revolutionary desire to eliminate the authority of man in his roles as husband and father, starting initially with the elimination of God, the Holy Father, and the subsequent reduction of religious authority, fracturing the family unit, encouraging youthful rebellion, and ultimately depopulating the planet due to less secure families and thus lower birth rates. And in 2025, who can argue that their aim hasn't been achieved? Of course, Jay wasn't arguing against himself, and his opponent came armed with her own series of arguments and examples, albeit extraordinarily weak ones by comparison. When asked to defend the position that feminism is a net good for civilization, it is incumbent upon her to define her standard of what constitutes good. She used the argument of the innovator scale, which is admittedly a reasonable classically liberal argument. Equality of opportunity is arguably an enriching ideal and allows for the greatest good for the greatest number, or at least the opportunity to flourish and achieve betterment. With equality of opportunity comes an expansion of the ability to innovate. The possibility of success through innovation becomes tangible for all, and those with talent can thrive regardless of economic or social circumstances. Although the reality of the current day illustrates to us that it is only a few short steps from advocating for equality of opportunity to the enforcement of quotas and the advocacy of equality of outcome under the guise of giving everyone a fair go, rather than a more discriminatory system of meritocracy with specific standards of expectation and excellence that is not offered to everyone but operates at an optimal level, as those in certain positions may truly deserve it and have earned it. It could also be argued that undeniable abilities, gifts, and talents rarely go unnoticed for long anyway, regardless of the ideological structuring of a society. As an example, there are numerous rags to riches stories about exceptionally gifted athletes, or examples of athletes achieving deserved success despite the zeitgeist of their epoch. The other apparent benefit of feminism to society, as argued in the debate, was an increase in GDP, with women able to make greater contribution in the workforce. This, however, is a weaker argument given the corrupt and manipulated economic system by deep state shadow government figures and the fiat paper currency or abstract numbers on screens, which are not backed by anything tangible. The GDP argument is also solely materialistic and money obsessed. Western countries have some of the highest GDP in the world, especially the USA. There are high standards of living, with plenty of money in circulation. The elite strata of society are very content and financially secure, be they men or women. But does monetary wealth and economic prosperity necessarily constitute simultaneous personal, communal, societal, mental, or spiritual health? No, it doesn't. We live in prosperous and comfortable times right now when compared to other periods of history. And yet, nihilism, malaise, toxic habits, and self-destructive addictions are prevalent in the society. And we are by no means ideally happy, healthy, or fulfilled either individually or collectively. No amount of social policy will necessarily change this because the issues are deeply existential. The woman in the debate referred to natural traits of competence and leadership and natural phenomena predisposing men and women to certain activities, jobs, or roles in society. The natural phenomenon of IQ was mentioned, as was the bell curve distribution. The average IQ is 100, constituting the highest concentration of both men and women. But men are more represented in the extremes of low and high scores. There are far more unintelligent men than there are unintelligent women. But there are far more intelligent, successful, curious, serious, logical, and yet unsocialized male geniuses than there are the same type of women. Anyone, including women, can philosophize about the world with varying levels of competence, experience, and knowledge, but very few will study philosophy and know it well. Philosophy requires logical reasoning and a highly intellectual and studious personality. You must enjoy things that, on the surface, are not particularly exciting and are somewhat mundane. Historically, logic, reason, and serious scholarship are or have been fundamentally male phenomena and appeal more to the male brain because of an innate desire to pursue greatness, pursue genius, and pursue truth. There are far more male philosophers than there are female philosophers, let alone those that are worth studying extensively. Philosophy just isn't typically a female domain, and therefore, arguably, women ought not to try and debate it unless they are willing to, at a minimum, do what a man who is enthused by the subject is willing to do. The expectation is to read a lot of books and think a lot of uncomfortable and challenging thoughts and have discussions about this without getting too emotional. Most women are of average intelligence, but can't or don't philosophize or think particularly deeply about the world. So they are easily manipulated and adhere to mass social pressure and programming more often. It could be argued that women are largely more robotic, common, and predictable in their thinking and in their adherence to enforced narratives and norms than men typically are. Arguably, men are the true dreamers, romantics, artists, and poets. And now that modern women have been liberated and don't need a man as such, they can reveal more of their true female nature, which can be quite cold, calculated, ruthlessly selective, and hypergamous, though through no fault of their own to a certain extent. Women act dainty and romantic with the men they like, but are otherwise indifferent. Arguably, men love more deeply and passionately than women, and will typically take a breakup harder than a woman for a period of time. When considering instincts, women are ruled by their momentary sense of safety in a situation, and the emotions associated with a situation. They act on how a man makes them feel, and will ruthlessly detach from men who make them feel unsafe for any reason, or bored for any reason. In previous associations with women, they have acknowledged I have some exceptional talents and great potential. Yet since I am a creative type, finding an initial outlet for the talent and channeling it appropriately has taken time. A burning desire to create or express oneself will often go unnoticed or be underappreciated unless or until it comes to fruition and you can earn significant recognition for it. Then suddenly, it seems it came out of nowhere, according to those who were not paying attention. In a serious relationship, after the initial honeymoon phase, and a brief grace period of leniency, a woman's body clock begins to dictate virtually every decision she makes. Whether she likes it or not, her fertility and sexual market value diminishes much faster than that of a man. So eventually it will dawn on her that she must act decisively, and hence she is willing to be unsentimental if her patience runs out. But it is also true that in the race of life, most women will hang out at the finish line and wait for the winners. Every perceptive young man knows the standard characteristics of the modern day young woman. She just wants to have fun, be adventurous, spontaneous, and live an idealistic life of memorable experiences until she eventually settles down. This isn't even necessarily a bad thing as such, but it is predictable. However, if your life is particularly busy, regimented, or dull, as the reality of day-to-day life usually is, then you won't appeal to many women, unless you are exceptional in another area, at least not initially, especially when their expectations are now so significantly influenced by the concoction of social media and the veritable smorgasbord of potential online suitors, from which only the most appealing will be selected. Even if you find your purpose and are clearly building towards something better, and you pour your energy into it, a woman will want your attention, and will eventually feel neglected if you're too focused on your goals. This is when you can give her an ultimatum. Either she can stay and accept what you're doing, she can leave you, or you will leave her. The creative type may not have the resources to be considered a winner initially, and will be slower to reach the finish line. But when they do, they will have used exceptional ingenuity to build something new and immensely attractive to the right type of women. However, the subject of philosophy is generally boring and requires consistently long and focused attention spans. Women are typically easily bored and arguably have a shorter attention span to the form of intelligence that isn't bound to emotion, since they're so in touch with their emotions. So once again, philosophy just isn't naturally their domain, and they won't be attracted to your mind, creativity, or your wisdom unless they're initially attracted to other things first, typically physical attributes. In modern times, girls and women are told by society how they deserve to be treated. Think of common tropes like "you go girl," "boss babe," "empowered," "you can have it all," and "princess treatment." In modern times, boys and men are told by society how they should treat women, almost to the point of tedium. Think of the constant browbeating, widespread policing of language and behavior, and seemingly endless social campaigns against violence and abuse. Yes, violence and abuse are negative expressions of emotional extremes, but how stupid or uncivilized do you have to be where you must be constantly reminded by the state, in the media, or even at sporting events, that you shouldn't beat or seriously degrade anyone in your life, especially if you claim to care for them? And yet, of course, violence and abuse still regrettably occur despite ever-increasing public awareness. The liberal superstructure responds by ramping up its messaging even more, as if the infantile masses just aren't understanding a simple concept and need more education from their nanny, thereby numbing the brains of the already civilized to the point of frustration. The irrational, the uncivilized, and the monstrous people of the world reject the ideals of liberalism by their very nature. That's why the worst criminals are repeat offenders, despite numerous attempts at rehabilitation and reintegration. The prison system thankfully provides us with a necessary veil, shielding us from true brutality and evil. But the veil is still not and never will be real, and we all have a capacity for brutality and evil, which cannot be escaped but only mitigated. The veil is a noble lie. Whilst there are plenty of intelligent, honest, and contrarian people who may obey the noble lies of the superstructure to keep the peace and simply go about their day without incident, they still know it's not real and haven't completely attached themselves to the current system of values. That is to say, they may know the rules to the game so that they can play the game correctly when needed. How could they not, since they're constantly told how the game is supposed to work? but they have not internalized the rules of the game and built their character, identity, and mode of being around the game like so many others. Because why would they do that? It's just a game, and many other games have existed before it. This is just seemingly the most polite and strict game currently adhered to. Every player in the game is playing the game, but they are not, or ought not to be, the game themselves, or else they will be played. Once again, in modernity, girls and women are told by society how they deserve to be treated, constantly having their egos inflated and reinforced. Boys and men are told by society how to treat women, but nobody is told how to treat boys and men, aside from more like women, or even as defective women, which they are not and naturally cannot be, since they are different. The modern man is civilized, but arguably too civilized, as a hollowed out, passionless husk to the point of being stultified. The artistic genius Vincent van Gogh, who struggled with mental illness and felt greatly misunderstood and underappreciated in his life, said this with his last words: "The sadness will last forever. There may be a great fire in our soul, yet no one ever comes to warm himself at it, and the passers-by see only a wisp of smoke." The behavior of the 20th century Austrian philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein demonstrated that he was especially unconventional and frankly weird, but wonderfully brilliant. He blurred the line between genius and madness, just as many great minds do. A highly cynical man, Wittgenstein was clearly neurodivergent. He would play language games out of boredom with those who we may now call normies, NPCs, or neurotypicals. A grand intellect often pokes fun at incessant yet equally fragile societal narratives and norms for the absurd things that they are. Wittgenstein argued that words and sentences don't have inherent meaning, but rather their meaning is derived from how they are used and arranged within specific activities or contexts, which he called language games. These games, like ordering a plate of food, asking someone to deliver a parcel, or taking a loan out from the bank, illustrate how language is entwined with actions and social practices. A hungry wild animal who is not subject to our language games could just walk into a supermarket and take food off the shelf, start eating it, and be appropriately satiated. A hungry human could also do the same and achieve the same desired outcome. But a hungry human who is conditioned to play language games before acting on their pure instinct must make socially accepted sounds with their vocal cords and pay for the food with special pieces of metal and paper called money, or even a magic card with invisible money on it, at an assigned location called a checkout. Wittgenstein is correct. If we order food at a restaurant, the words we say to the waiter as things in themselves are absurd, but the outcome such words achieve is necessary because we have to act on our instinctive desire to eat in order to survive, and we get the food we need if we play the language game of ordering food and play it correctly so that the waiter understands us. Thus, ordering food in a particular way with particular words becomes a recognized social practice. A grand intellect will often happily challenge the idea that information we receive or ideas we form are foundational or given, and therefore unquestionable. This concept is known as the myth of the given, developed by the American 20th century philosopher Wilfrid Sellars. He critiques the idea that our perceptions provide us with direct, unmediated knowledge of the world. He argues that our sensory experience is always mediated by conceptual processes, and that knowledge acquisition is not a passive process of givenness, but an active one of conceptual integration. Basically, there is a requirement for us to take an active role in forming and interpreting our worldview and education, particularly in the humanities subjects. Far too many people fall victim to the myth of the given and passively accept what they believe and learn about the world without ever challenging such information. And thus, if this information is ever questioned, they struggle to defend it, or even struggle to argue for why it is worth defending, because they've just always thought that's the way things are or that's the way things should be. But they've rarely, if ever, considered the possibility that what they believe is subject to legitimate debate and requires robust defense. That's why asking them to defend their position, or simply asking why they believe what they do, is often met with a blank or baffled expression. The masses tend not to concern themselves with the functioning of their civilization. Wrongly, they will take its existence as a given, at least until any major dysfunction within it disrupts their own life. Such dysfunction, of course, is rarely foreseen by the masses, but is noticeable, if not blatantly obvious, to those who are aware. Family gatherings at liberal dominant households are often boring, surface level, and absurdly positive. There is no room for real, deep, uncomfortable, passionate, political, or cynical remarks. Only cleverly delivered humour or overt sarcasm makes such ideological clashes tolerable. For context, despite claiming openness, a liberal will rarely, if ever, speak from the heart without first running every thought through a filter and posit it with a disclaimer. They don't really seem to care for anything outside of the metaphorical four walls of their own life, or outside of whatever news of the day current thing they are told to publicly discuss, promote, or be outraged by. Subscription services reinforce the prevalence of these political, ideological, and cultural echo chambers. The gradual elimination of free-to-air media, sport coverage, and entertainment weakens already weak commonalities by means of alienation. Subscription services phase out the casual viewer. The viewer who, for example, may enjoy watching a sport if it is on air, but who has not reached the point, and may never reach the point, where they can justify becoming a paying consumer. If you want to identify as a sports fanatic or pay money to consume content you enjoy, in the current epoch that's acceptable. As in a world lacking meaning, even shallow things can seemingly provide meaning for a moment, and that is arguably a good thing. The French absurdist philosopher Albert Camus said, "The literal meaning of life is whatever you're doing that prevents you from ending it," which I find obvious, frustratingly simplistic, but also morbidly hilarious, as we can only imagine the many ridiculous things people enjoy doing that somehow gives them enough satisfaction to survive. But there may come a time when you won't be able to relate to the people around you in general water cooler conversation, simply because they didn't pay to consume the same content you did or never have. The same thing goes for any niche interest, really. I am currently a single man by choice, but despite having a good amount of options in the dating market, with the ability and resources to go out regularly if I wanted to, I know that out of a significant pool of potential partners, I will only choose to talk to or date a few at a time, and from those few, I may only truly enjoy connecting with even less, because I suspect already that I won't relate to many of them, especially in these modern times of borderline illiteracy, coupled with the fact that I often like to discuss what I read and what I think about the world, because I'm passionate about it. Not to mention, much of my humour pokes fun at the madness of the world we live in. All of this is deemed insightful, entertaining, and fascinating to some, but pompous and boring to others. Hence the necessity to keep things light, fun, and playful on a date, not getting too real, too authentic, or too deep too quickly, so that the interaction can continue to develop at a slow but steady speed. However, in the not too distant future, it is increasingly likely that people will become more insular, asocial, and passionately hyper-focused on their own interests, with their own small subculture cliques of other like-minded associates, effectively becoming even more specialized in the specialized niche they have already carved out for themselves by choice, receiving what they want when they want it, and never being regularly exposed or exposed at all to what they don't like. Hence the likelihood of having an emotional meltdown anytime they encounter it. As the Spanish philosopher Jose Ortega y Gasset wrote in his classic 1929 book The Revolt of the Masses, the specialist knows very well his own tiny corner of the universe, but he is radically ignorant of all the rest. The liberals' idea of controversy is to say something like, this might be a bit controversial, but maybe we shouldn't have open borders. Or, sorry to go a bit tinfoil hat here, but I reckon men and women might be different, and they might have natural proclivities towards certain things. I know I'm skating on thin ice there, but it's just food for thought, you know? It's pretty out there, and I don't want to be too radical or tread on any toes, but it's something to ponder on. I don't know about you, but it's just my opinion, and I'm entitled to it, you know? As if they're proud they had something resembling a free thought by advocating for what was common knowledge for previous generations only a matter of mere decades ago. I will often have internal battles with myself to limit oscillation into misanthropic tendencies, as I know this is not me at my best, but I know I've also been wounded by life more than most, and I've had a life littered with chaos, and several inauthentic, shallow, or unsatisfying relationships and friendships that gradually just wither away. I am surprised and pleased when I cross paths with someone who truly shares and fulfills my yearning for authenticity and deeply meaningful bonds. I find plenty of common interactions to be boring and surface level, while I'm quite capable of talking nonsensical junk and flirtatious banter, and both can be necessary and fun. After a while, I'm not truly engaged by it, and I crave an intellectual or even metaphysical spiritual connection. And I haven't yet decided whether I'll find such a connection by looking to other people, or by looking inward to myself and further exploring faith. Thus, for the soulful, resilient, and masculine men who know this is a game and passively or openly reject it, since society doesn't tell anyone how to treat you anymore because masculine virtues are dead or inverted, since society pretends you're not there or belittles your experiences, don't forget you currently still are an individual within the system, and the system has to acknowledge you eventually, even begrudgingly so, thanks to your existence within it, however stoic, silent, or inconvenient you may seem. Even if the system, in all its supposed rationalistic wisdom, just wants to try and understand you and categorize you, since it likes to assume it has an answer and category for everything, it may still fail to understand, because not every answer is a correct one, and some questions are still to be answered, and may never be answered. You are a black sheep on the surface, but possibly a lone wolf at heart. Therefore, it is incumbent upon you to firstly forge your own path where possible, and learn how to treat yourself well. Once you are grounded in your worldview, and mentally aware of who and what you are, or who and what you could be, you can play your own game, a game within the game, simultaneously poking fun at the games we all play, firstly for and by yourself, for your own benefit and your own amusement. Then, slowly over time, maybe others, seeing more than a wisp of smoke, will stop to warm themselves at your roaring fire, and will wish to play your game of life too, thereby evidently increasing the chances of initial communal and possible societal renewal. But the game of life doesn't have to be a multiplayer game, and you should learn to accept this, especially if you feel you can make a more valuable contribution to the world as an individual or single player in the game. However, it is undoubted that the game is more structurally sound and can be more enjoyable and potentially more meaningful if and when others join in.